In 1885, a Finnish physics professor named Carl Lemström stood before the distinguished members of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and presented carefully documented experimental results that should have completely transformed global agriculture forever and eliminated the need for purchased synthetic fertilizers entirely. His meticulous research demonstrated something that seemed absolutely impossible to the assembled scientists who had gathered to evaluate his extraordinary claims. Plants grown under controlled electrical influence produced yields between 200 and 500% greater than identical control plants grown without any electrical stimulation whatsoever. The vegetables grew dramatically faster, significantly larger, and measurably more nutritious when analyzed chemically. The grain crops produced substantially heavier seed heads with higher protein content that commanded premium prices. The results were not marginal improvements that required statistical analysis to detect, but transformative increases visible to any observer that would have revolutionized global food production if widely adopted by the farming community. Lemström had spent over 7 years conducting extraordinarily meticulous experiments at the prestigious University of Helsinki and at remote agricultural research stations scattered across Finland and northern Sweden. He constructed elaborate antenna systems from copper wire that collected atmospheric electricity from the air above his test plots and directed this captured electrical energy into growing beds through carefully buried copper electrodes positioned at precise depths. He measured voltages continuously with calibrated instruments, documented growth rates through weekly measurements, weighed harvests with precision scales, and analyzed nutritional content with the best chemical methods available to 19th century science. His methodology was absolutely rigorous by any standard. His results were independently reproducible by other researchers. His conclusions were undeniable to anyone who examined the evidence honestly. Plants responded dramatically and consistently to electrical stimulation in ways that no fertilizer application could possibly match, regardless of formulation or application rate. The assembled Academy members examined his extensive data carefully over several days. They verified his experimental methodology against accepted scientific standards. They could find no flaws whatsoever in his experimental design or his data collection procedures. Yet the implications of his findings were so utterly extraordinary that most simply could not accept that something so remarkably simple and inexpensive could actually produce results that dramatic. Surely, if buried metal and freely available atmospheric electricity could multiply crop yields by 5 times, some farmer somewhere would have discovered this obvious fact centuries earlier through simple observation. Lemström published his findings in a comprehensive book titled Electricity in Agriculture and Horticulture, that was translated into multiple languages and read by researchers throughout Europe and America. Then, something curious happened that would repeat itself for the next 60 years whenever electroculture research produced positive results. The findings were acknowledged, discussed briefly in scientific circles, and then quietly forgotten as attention shifted elsewhere. No major agricultural institution followed up with large-scale trials. No government-funded implementation programs, no farming publications promoted the techniques to working farmers. The research simply disappeared from mainstream awareness despite its extraordinary implications. This is the story of electroculture, the buried metal technology that makes plants grow 5 times faster, and the coordinated suppression that ensured farmers would never learn they could achieve infinite yields without purchasing anything from chemical companies. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Let's begin. The science of electroculture reveals precisely why electrical stimulation produces remarkable plant responses that chemical fertilizers simply cannot replicate regardless of their sophisticated formulation or heavy application rate. Plants are fundamentally electrical organisms that depend completely on ion transport and electrical signaling for every single biological process occurring within their tissues. Nutrients enter root cells through electrically charged ion channels embedded in cell membranes that respond to voltage gradients. Water moves through stems and leaves via osmotic pressure gradients that are essentially electrical phenomena at the molecular level. Growth hormones travel through plant tissues along electrical pathways that function similarly to primitive nervous systems. Cell division itself requires very specific electrical conditions across the dividing membrane to proceed normally and produce healthy daughter cells. Every measurable aspect of plant biology involves electrical processes at the cellular and molecular level. The Earth itself generates a constant and powerful electrical field between the negatively charged planetary surface and the positively charged ionosphere located many miles above in the upper atmosphere. This atmospheric electrical gradient measures approximately 100 to 200 volts per meter under normal fair weather conditions and increases dramatically to thousands of volts per meter during approaching thunderstorms. Plants evolved over hundreds of millions of years within this constant electrical environment and developed sophisticated biological systems specifically designed to sense and utilize this ambient electromagnetic energy. They are quite literally designed by evolution to interact productively with Earth's natural electromagnetic field. Atmospheric antennas constructed from conductive metal collect this natural electrical energy continuously and concentrate it into specific growing areas where plants can access it. A simple copper wire extending vertically above a garden acts as an effective antenna that gathers atmospheric electrical charge and conducts it downward toward the ground. Buried copper electrodes positioned in the root zone distribute this collected atmospheric energy throughout the soil where plant roots can access and utilize it for enhanced metabolic processes. The entire system requires absolutely no external power source whatsoever because it simply harvests free energy that exists naturally in the atmosphere continuously throughout every day and night. The collected electricity stimulates plant metabolism in multiple documented ways. Nutrient uptake accelerates because electrically charged mineral ions move more readily through energized soil. Cell division rates increase under electrical stimulation. Enzyme activity intensifies. Chlorophyll production increases. Root development expands dramatically. Every measurable aspect of plant growth responds positively to appropriate electrical conditions. The magnitude of response surprised even early researchers who expected modest improvements. Lemstrom's 200 to 500% yield increases seemed impossible until other researchers replicated them independently. French experiments showed similar results. German studies confirmed the findings. American researchers produced comparable data. The effect was real, reproducible, and far larger than anyone had anticipated. A modern understanding of plant electrophysiology confirms what early researchers observed empirically. We now know that plants actively sense and respond to electrical fields. They adjust growth patterns based on electromagnetic conditions. They communicate through electrical signals. The idea that enhancing their electrical environment would improve growth is not mystical, but straightforwardly biological. The history of electroculture research spans over a century of positive findings that were repeatedly ignored, defunded, and suppressed. Carl Lemstrom's 1885 research built upon earlier observations dating back to the 18th century. European gardeners had noticed that plants near lightning rods grew unusually well. Farmers observed enhanced growth near metal fences and poles. These anecdotal observations accumulated for decades before systematic research began. Lemstrom was the first to apply rigorous scientific methodology to investigate what practical observers had long suspected. French researcher and agricultural innovator Justin Christofleau conducted extensive and highly publicized electroculture experiments continuously from 1910 through the late 1940s, dedicating his entire professional career to proving and promoting this revolutionary technology. He developed dramatically simplified antenna designs that ordinary farmers with no technical background whatsoever could easily construct from inexpensive materials available at any hardware store. His signature copper coil systems wrapped carefully around wooden stakes created intense localized electromagnetic fields that produced measurable and consistent yield improvements with absolutely minimal financial investment. He published extremely detailed construction instructions with illustrations and promoted electroculture tirelessly through agricultural publications, public lectures, and dramatic field demonstrations that attracted large crowds of curious farmers. Christofleau's dedicated work attracted very significant attention throughout France during the 1920s, when farmers desperately sought ways to increase production. Thousands of French farmers across multiple regions conducted their own experiments with his published techniques, reporting remarkable success in letters that Christofleau collected and published. Major agricultural journals published favorable detailed reports from multiple independent observers. Regional government officials expressed serious interest in funding large-scale implementation programs that could transform French agriculture. Electroculture genuinely appeared poised to transform French farming practices permanently and reduce dependence on expensive imported fertilizers. Then, the rapidly expanding synthetic fertilizer industry began its aggressive commercial expansion throughout Europe following World War I. Massive factories that had produced nitrogen-based explosives for the devastating war effort converted their production facilities to manufacturing synthetic fertilizers for agricultural use. These enormous capital investments in factory infrastructure required correspondingly massive consumer markets to generate profitable returns for investors. The industry desperately needed farmers purchasing synthetic nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium compounds continuously season after season. Any technology that eliminated this carefully cultivated fertilizer dependency threatened billions of dollars in projected revenue that investors expected. Research funding shifted decisively toward chemical approaches during the 1920s and 1930s. Agricultural universities received grants from fertilizer manufacturers to study chemical nutrition. Electroculture research received no corporate sponsorship. The scientists who pursued electrical approaches found themselves marginalized professionally. Their papers were rejected from journals edited by chemically oriented researchers. Their careers stalled while colleagues studying fertilizers advanced. The pattern repeated whenever electroculture research emerged. Soviet scientists conducted extensive electroculture experiments during the 1930s, with positive results that were classified and never published internationally. American researchers at several universities produced confirming data that was never followed up with implementation trials. British scientists documented yield improvements that generated no policy response. World War II disrupted all agricultural research, and afterward chemical approaches dominated completely. The Green Revolution of the 1950s and 1960s promoted synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and hybrid seeds as the only path to increased yields. Alternative approaches, including electroculture, were dismissed as primitive superstitions incompatible with modern scientific agriculture. Researchers who suggested otherwise found themselves excluded from mainstream institutions. The practical implementation of electroculture requires only basic materials that cost almost nothing compared to annual fertilizer expenditures. The simplest atmospheric antenna consists of a copper wire extending vertically above the growing area. A wire between 10 and 20 feet tall collects substantial atmospheric charge that increases with height. The wire can attach to a wooden pole, bamboo stake, or any non-conductive support. Multiple wires spaced throughout a garden create overlapping fields that cover the entire growing area. Buried electrodes distribute collected energy into the root zone where plants access it. Copper rods, pipes, or coiled wire buried 12 to 18 inches deep connect to the atmospheric antenna through insulated wire. The electrode surface area affects energy distribution. Larger electrodes or longer coils provide more extensive coverage. The buried metal does not corrode rapidly because soil contact actually protects copper from oxidation. Orientation may affect antenna performance based on Earth's magnetic field alignment. Some researchers reported optimal results with antennas aligned north-south. Others found east-west orientation preferable for certain crops. Experimentation determines what works best for specific locations and conditions. The variables involved suggest that local magnetic field variations affect optimal configurations. Coiled wire designs concentrate electromagnetic effects more powerfully than straight conductors. Christoflow's spiral coils wrapped around wooden stakes created intense localized fields that produced dramatic responses in nearby plants. The coil geometry appears to focus energy in ways that straight wires do not. Modern researchers exploring these techniques often favor coiled designs. The initial installation requires several hours of work but produces benefits for years without additional input. Unlike fertilizers that must be purchased and applied repeatedly every growing season, electroculture infrastructure remains functional indefinitely. Copper electrodes do not require replacement. Antenna wires need only occasional maintenance. The ongoing cost after installation approaches zero. Results typically become visible within 2 to 3 weeks of installation. Plant color deepens as chlorophyll production increases. Growth rate accelerates noticeably. Root systems expand dramatically. The changes are obvious enough that skeptical gardeners often become convinced simply by observing their own results. The suppression of electroculture follows patterns identical to suppression of every technology that threatens established industries dependent on consumable products. The synthetic fertilizer industry generates over $200 billion annually worldwide. This revenue depends entirely on farmers and gardeners believing they must purchase fertility rather than generate it through free techniques. Every electroculture installation represents a permanent customer loss. Every gardener who achieves abundant yields without fertilizer will never purchase fertilizer again. Agricultural education systems receive substantial funding from fertilizer industry sources. University research programs depend on corporate grants. Extension services partner with input suppliers. The information that agricultural professionals distribute reflects the perspectives of their funders. Techniques that eliminate input purchases do not align with funder interests and therefore do not appear in educational materials. Scientific journals have systematically rejected electroculture research regardless of methodological quality. Peer reviewers trained in chemical paradigms dismiss electrical approaches without serious consideration. Editors concerned about institutional relationships avoid publishing research that powerful industries oppose. The appearance of scientific consensus against electroculture emerges from systematic exclusion rather than evaluation of evidence. The few modern researchers who investigate electroculture report difficulty obtaining funding, publishing results, and maintaining academic positions. Their careers suffer for pursuing questions that industry would prefer remain unexamined. The professional incentives powerfully discourage investigation, regardless of researcher interest or preliminary positive findings. Internet communities have revived electroculture interest despite institutional resistance. Gardeners sharing results directly bypass the gatekeepers who suppressed this knowledge for a century. Videos showing dramatic growth differences between treated and untreated plots provide evidence that institutional science refuses to generate. The technology spreads horizontally through practitioner networks rather than vertically through official channels. The pattern mirrors suppression of every technology that threatens industry revenue from consumable products. Permanent solutions cannot be permitted when business models depend on recurring purchases. Knowledge that empowers independence must be marginalized when profits require dependence. The logic is consistent across industries and decades. The electroculture system waiting to be installed in your garden represents permanent yield enhancement that the fertilizer industry has spent over a century ensuring you would never discover. A gardener could install simple copper antennas and buried electrodes using materials costing less than $20. They would watch their plants grow faster and produce more abundantly than any fertilizer program could achieve. They would harvest vegetables with enhanced nutrition from soil energized by free atmospheric electricity. They would never purchase fertilizer again because they would never need it again. The $200 billion fertilizer industry knows exactly why electroculture threatens their existence. The researchers have surely reviewed the historical literature. Their executives understand that free technology cannot compete with paid technology when marketing budgets determine what farmers learn. They choose continued suppression because their business model requires continued ignorance. Every bag of fertilizer you purchase represents money that buried copper would have kept in your family permanently. Every depleted harvest from exhausted soil represents yields that electrical stimulation would have multiplied dramatically. Every year of chemical dependency represents freedom that a few hours of antenna installation would have provided forever. Carl Lemstrom documented 500% yield increases in 1885. Justin Christoflo taught thousands of French farmers electroculture techniques in the 1920s. Soviet, American, British, and German researchers all confirmed that electrical stimulation dramatically improves plant growth. The fertilizer industry made sure their findings would never reach you. One buried copper rod, one vertical antenna wire. Plants grow 5 times faster. Yields multiply every season. Costs nothing after installation. Works forever without inputs. They banned this research from agricultural education because your infinite yields mean there's zero sales. Now you know what Lemstrom proved in 1885. Now you know why you were never taught it. If this opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every single like and share spreads what the $200 billion fertilizer industry has suppressed for over 140 years. See you in the next one.